Welcome to the #1 podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, here to talk about MSU's newest addition to the roster, 7-footer Szymon Zapala. Before we begin, a quick word of thanks to all of you who support the show via one-time gifts and on a recurring basis. Special thanks to Patreon supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level, Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, and Chad Hickey. Draymond Green supporters, Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., Michael Bosnick, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, Daniel Dronach, and Mike Huntoon, who bumped up this month from the Scott Skiles. So thanks a lot, Mike. Also to all the people who support us in Scott Skiles, of course. And to those who on Substack, Rich Wagner, Kenneth Kramett, and Roger Bronsink. If you appreciate MSU content we crank out, please head on over to the Final Fours on theschedule.com/support to reach all the necessary links to support the show. And also final reminder, or almost final reminder, we will be hosting an informal in-person TIFNOT supporters dinner in the Lansing area sometime around the end of July. Invites go out sometime near the end of the next few weeks, I suppose, near the end of May. So if you'd like to get on that list, you just need to drop on over to the support page, sign up at the Draymond Green level or above on Patreon or paid spot on Substack, and you get an invite to our in-person dinner. All right, Rod, we have what is almost assuredly the final piece to MSU roster for this year with Polish super senior Szymon Zapala. And I went on YouTube.
I'm gonna guess that's pronounced Simon, as in Simon.
Yeah, so I went on YouTube.
Unless have you confirmed it?
I went on YouTube,
okay.
and it pronounces Szymon. Or Szymon.
Szymon, okay.
So now
all right,
that's
my bad.
I mean, it's probably the equivalent to Simon in English.
I'm looking at the Longwood page, and unfortunately, sometimes these will have pronunciation guides, and it doesn't. So we're out of luck there. But okay, if that's my assumption was Simon, but you may well be right.
We'll find out, I guess, soon enough. As we get we'll see what the announcers try and piece of. I've heard people call him Seisman, and I don't think that's it.
No.
I'm not Polish, obviously, last name Larson, but I've had a number of Polish friends, a lot of Polish people here on this side, and that's my guess is that sounds about right. But anyway, so we'll go with that for now until we're shown we're wrong. So we'll go with Szymon Zapala from Longwood University in California. He is a 7 feet tall, 240 pounds. He played in the NCAA tournament this last year. Played 35 games, with 24 of those being starts, averaging almost 10 points a game, 5.6 boards, 2.2 of those offensive, almost a block per game. He shot a blistering 66% from three, which means he was 2 for 3 for the season. And he shot 63% from the floor, a little better than that, 67% from the line. He played 3 years at Utah State prior to going to Longwood the last year. He was playing behind someone who played for the NBA.
Had
now.
a two-way deal.
On
a two-way contract with the NBA, and then another guy who is a pro in Europe. So he wasn't playing a lot at Utah State. We're not going to spend that, but he was playing behind guys that were actually productive.
Yeah. Was he playing under Sprinkle then before? He must have been playing for Sprinkle before he went to...
yeah, he must have. I don't know.
Was he just there 1 year at Utah State?
I think he was there. Yeah. No. Sprinkle was only there 1 year. I think he played for Ryan Odom, who's now at VCU.
All right. So I guess, this is the five. This is the elusive five that everyone's, Michigan State needed to add. It's probably not what people expected, and certainly was not much talk about this until, just a couple of days ago, and then all of a sudden, and we're just talking now on May 14th, so it just sort of happened quickly, as these things in the portal usually do.
Yeah, and look, the first thing that's worth noting is that this is an unusual kind of transfer in the Tom Izzo era, and that at least on the surface, and it might come out that there was some type of connection with someone on the staff and this player, possibly, but by all appearances, this is one that's outside the normal realm of where Michigan State tends to focus. So we've talked a lot about this in recent weeks, that when you look over the history of transfers at Michigan State, it's almost exclusively, maybe a couple of exceptions, but almost exclusively been either guys that Izzo recruited as high school players, or they're from the upper Midwest, and so they're guys that he would have connections to in some way.
Sure.
He'd be able to get takes on them via high school coaches, AAU coaches, et cetera, that are well known to the Michigan State staff because they're upper Midwest guys. Now, Tyson Walker was something of an exception to that, although I do believe there was someone on the non-coaching staff that had a connection to him. That's my understanding, but there was none of the normal stuff with him. Ben Carter would be another example, but not many others. Most of them were the Joey Hauser, Bryn Forbes, Mike Chappelle, Aaron Harris. They're those kind of guys. Either they're from the upper Midwest, or they're guys that Izzo actually recruited in high school, didn't get, and then when they decided to transfer, got back in on them.
Mm-hmm.
So he's an exception in that regard. As you said, not much track record at Utah State. He transfers to Longwood and was really productive when you look at it on a per-minute basis. Now, he started about 2/3 of their games, averaged 17 minutes a game, and that's one thing I've heard is that conditioning was somewhat responsible for that. So that would be something that's going to be an issue Michigan State's going to want to deal with, just getting him in better shape, right?
Yeah.
But he averaged, almost 10 points and 6 boards a game in 17 minutes. So that's actually pretty good production. And for an NCAA tournament team, so he wasn't just, playing on a 10-17 team in the MEAC. He actually was playing and was productive for a team that was good at their level. The other thing I like to look at in these kind of transfers is you look at how they fared against better opposition or in big games. So when I look at how he played, the season opener was against St. Bonaventure, which is an A-10 team. He went 8 for 12 from the floor, 20 points, 11 rebounds, and had a block. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Had a game against Dayton, a good NCAA tournament team. Sorry, I'm scrolling here. There it is. He was 4 for 9 from the floor, had 10 boards, and 9 points in that game. So, decent production, again, against a very good Dayton team. And then you look at the end of the season, the last 2 games of their conference tournament, which they had to win to get into the NCAA tournament against High Point, he had 6 boards and 17 points. And then he had 17 points and 7 boards in the title game against UNC Asheville. And in the game against Houston in the NCAA tournament, 6 points, 3 boards. So he's shown some things. Getting beyond the numbers, there are clips out there, and it's really dangerous.
He makes every
to
shot.
Rely a hell of a lot on clips, right? But what it looks, obviously, he's got size you cannot teach. At 7 feet, 240 pounds, he will be their biggest player. So that's a positive. You've added some size. He looks to have pretty good hands. Also, for a guy his size, there's some evidence in those clips in terms of pick and roll defense that his lateral movement is not bad. Now, I'm not expecting him to be Xavier Tillman, but as long as he's good enough to hang in there and not get exploited in pick and roll where he's away from the rim, and then I would assume his size is going to help in terms of his ability to defend in the post. So you've got those things. One other thing I liked, his rebounding numbers were good. As we said, almost 6 a game, but 2.2 of those were on the offensive end. So he's shown a bit of a knack for being a second chance guy. That's helpful as well. I think that nothing that we've talked about in recent weeks has really changed very much. I think that Tom Izzo very clearly believes in the potential of Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper. This is not the kind of addition that you make when you don't have faith in those guys, because, there's not a guarantee here that this is a super productive Big Ten level player. I heard one of the guys at one of the MSU pay sites make a comment that he raises the floor of the position without negatively impacting the potential for those other two younger guys to continue to develop into what Michigan State staff believes they can be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably a pretty good way to describe it. I don't expect that he's going to be a guy that's going to come in and even be a 20-minute-a-night guy. Maybe he will, but I'd be surprised by that at this point. I think they've added him, as I just said, to give them a higher floor, meaning this is a guy we think if we need him to play real minutes, he's capable of doing that and doing it at a respectable enough level that it's going to help the team. But yet, not a guy who's going to disrupt what, in terms of what his expectations are, is going to disrupt what we believe is in the long-term interests of this program and this team, which would be Cooper and Kohler, one, being part of the team, not leaving.
Yeah.
But two, having a real strong opportunity to continue to develop into the kind of players Michigan State still believes they can be. But I guess my point in saying all that is Michigan State very clearly believes that Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper can be winning players at the 5, and this addition does not change that.
Yeah.
It's worth. There's been a lot of talk in the last week or so, too, especially about the impact of NIL and what some of the bigger name players, especially at the 5, have been getting. And, I caution
allegedly
taking it all to right. That's exactly it. I caution taking it as gospel, but, the word was that Cliff O'Murray got in excess of $1 million from Alabama. Great Osborne, who just followed his coach from Utah State. You mentioned Danny Sprinkle. He just followed Sprinkle from Utah State to Washington, I think it was yesterday. And supposedly he's getting $2 million with the potential for a couple $100,000 more, which just seems like insanity.
Yeah.
I mean, Great Osborne's a nice player, but what are we doing here? I mean, what would Xavier Tillman have been worth? Think about that. Just to cite one recent example, never mind, Zach Randolph or Andre Hudson. I mean, the mind reels. Adrian Payne. What that says, though, let's assume that those numbers bear some rough relationship to a reality. Meaning, okay, maybe it's not 2 million, maybe it's more like 1.2, something like that. That has ramifications,
Yeah.
What do you do if you're Michigan State? You look to add a guy like that. What do you say to Jaden Akins? What do you say to Trey Holloman or Xavier Booker, for that matter? Who hasn't proven what those other guys have, but that he's a guy who, if he had gone on the open market, would have been able to make a lot of money, or at least been promised a lot of money. We'll say that. You have to be cognizant of these things. Someone who's a fairly pretty reliable person on this kind of thing on the Spartan Mag board yesterday posted that, and this individual has a relationship with Doug Wojcik, I know, for example. He said that he was under the impression that Frankie Fiddler got somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000, which sounds about right when I put it in the context of what I know guys that came back to Michigan State last year who would have been at high demand in the open market. Tyson Walker, Malik Hall. Would I know that they got that Fiddler number sounds reasonable? But, fans think it's just, just pay the money. Well, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
You have locker room dynamics in place. I think what it all comes down to is this. Either you have faith in the guy who runs the program to understand the dynamics of his team, which isn't just about what they can do on the court. That's a huge part of it, but not solely that. It's also how are people going to react to adding somebody?
Yep.
And that means not just playing time. It means how much money they might be making. It's a lot of different things. Either you have faith in the guy running the program to have his finger on the pulse of all of that, or you don't. I do. There may be, I made the mistake, as it usually is, of perusing social media to see what the reaction was to this edition when it became obvious yesterday that it was probably coming. And we saw a lot of predictable responses from people who don't know very much, but unfortunately social media gives everybody a megaphone. And that's where I think so many of those people fall short in not knowing what they don't know. To me, again, if I don't believe that Tom Izzo has a pretty good idea of how to put his team together in a way that he thinks can compete, then he shouldn't be in the job.
Yeah,
right?
Right.
I mean, that's the conclusion you have to reach. If you don't have faith in the guy to do that, then why is he there? Well, I do have faith in his understanding that. And we'll see how it works out. But I think as, getting back to just purely the basketball ramifications of this, it looks to me like a nothing but upside kind of addition. Add a guy, third guy with size. So if an injury were to hit, for example,
Yep.
you've got some security there, knowing that you've got somebody that at least physically can handle the position. You might get, there's reason to think that you might be able to get some actual production out of him. I think it's very much a to be determined sort of deal in terms of what size role he will play. Because I also think, what happens with Cooper and Kohler's development is a major, major part of the story. And right now, I would still lean toward those two guys being ahead of him in the pecking order. That would be my initial guess.
Yeah.
But, that's all it is. It's a guess. Until he gets here and you start seeing what you've actually got to work with and what improvements he might be able to make. But it's also important what improvements Cooper and Kohler make. That's a big, big factor in this as well. But I don't see downside with it because it's not the kind of addition that's going to likely screw up team chemistry or team dynamics the way we were just speaking about,
Yeah, I think the pickup expresses a few things that are obvious that we had already suspected. Well, one thing, I guess, it's after the window is closed for the portal. So even if you were concerned about someone being a flight risk, I mean, I guess it's one of those things.
Yeah, they're not going down.
They could leave and just not play, which is, one possibility, which is unlikely, but that's certainly
right.
one thing that could happen.
That's not going to happen.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And also the fact that you're picking up someone who is clearly not going to be a dominant center. If Cliff Omaruya comes in, then I think it becomes pretty obvious to Kohler and Cooper that they are no longer the first string or right. battling for that first or second. And so this is not that kind of case. I think you probably could argue it may happen this way at some point. Maybe Zalaska starts playing really great and you can't keep him off the floor. But it's certainly those players cannot be expecting that. And so you are adding, as you said, you're just adding depth and you're adding someone who seems to be quality depth. But as we've seen many times, you playing up quite a bit. You just don't really ever know, especially with these big players.
And that's all true. And I would also say this, when you talk about you're adding depth, which I agree with, is probably the likely equation here. When you do that, that's a much harder thing to do then again, I think the average fan realized, well, just go get somebody. Doesn't work that way. Most of these guys want to play. And I imagine what's been said here is, well, look, you're going to have every opportunity to earn a role, which I'm sure is true. He will, you know, and if you're him and you're looking at the situation, you probably have reason to think, you know what? I'm not trying to beat out a guy who's been an All-American. I've got a shot here.
Sure.
But that is a hard thing to do in the portal, because most guys, you know, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find someone who you think is good enough to help you, but yet isn't going to be bothered by not having a well-defined large role available to them. If you think it's easy to find that, you're insane.
Yeah, right.
That's not easy to do.
Look at Fiddler.
If
you get Fiddler last year, what happens with Malik Hall? I mean, does Fiddler want to come because Malik Hall's there? Does Malik Hall want to continue?
Right.
I mean,
well, that's
right.
That's mostly what I'm talking about.
Right.
The would they want to come element of it.
Yeah.
Because you're defining it as, well, look, I want to get a guy who isn't going to be a threat to the existing order, you know, the guys who are already slated to be starters, but he needs to be good enough to matter. That's a pretty tough,
and he's got to be good enough,
needle to thread, right?
He's got to be good enough to, when that player that he's replacing leaves, now you've got a depth issue again, and you've got
that too. If that happens,
spot.
That's the worst of all worlds. But what I'm getting at is the guy who's not good enough to force the guys you've already got to leave, but yet you're saying he's also good enough to help you.
Right. We want you sort of good.
That's not easy. Yeah, that's a very, very difficult thing to manage. And so, you know, I think they've done that here. They had an opportunity to do that at this particular position, of course. That's part of it. But I think from those perspectives, you know, look, if Michigan State was of the mind, they just decided, you know what, we are just not believers in Carson and Jax anymore becoming the kind of player we need them to be for us to win things. If that's where they were at, then, you know, I guess you go out and you try to get one of these headline level guys and, you know, damn the consequences, right?
Yep.
But that's clearly not where Tom Izzo is at. Now, you know, people can differ with that take, but it's evidenced pretty clearly. I made this point the other night on the Spartan Mag board. Here's what I've concluded, which runs contrary to a lot of the internet fan base. Tom Izzo did not go after, at the time I said this, they hadn't added anybody at the 5. Well, now they've added somebody, but I think it's clear they didn't go add the quote-unquote superstar type, which, you know, it's questionable as to whether any of those guys actually is that anyway, let's just go with it. But he absolutely did opt to say, we've seen enough at the point guard, and let his 2.5-year starting point guard leave and turn the keys over at the most important position on the court to younger players. What does that tell you about how Tom Izzo sees his team and what needed to change? I think it's very, very clear.
Yeah. Crystal
clear, as a matter of fact. If you're paying any attention at all, that dynamic, and this edition is part of that, should make it very, very obvious. It's what we talked about all year. Guards, guards, guards. That's where the problem was, and that's what he believes needs to change.
Yeah, no question.
In terms of personnel.
Sure.
I'm sure he would say our 5s have to play better, but he obviously has faith in the guys he's got being able to do that, to get to a level that he needs. Whereas he looked at his guard play at the lead guard and said, nope, it's time for something different.
Yeah. Well, you know, if you need something different, maybe you have some problems with your gutters or something like that. It's springtime, and I'm looking out the window right now, and which, by the way, is really clean because I had the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids stop by, and they cleaned up all our windows. So if you need in the Grand Rapids area, make sure you have the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids come by. You get 15% off. You mentioned Final Four. When getting your estimate, you can find all that on the support page. They do fantastic work. They can also wash your house. But also the other part, not only do you want to be able to see out your windows, but you want to make sure you don't have all kinds of problems. And I can't tell you the difference those gutters have made in the front of my house, where I used to have to restain my door probably every other year. It was a big pain in the butt, because you got to find a time in July that's like warm enough where you can have your door open the whole time, but not too warm because then you get all the air conditioning comes out. Anyway, that was a big pain in the butt, and I had always assumed it was just from the sun just beating on my door. And then I got a couple small little gutters put around that door, and suddenly all that problem goes away. The amount of damage that water can do on things. I mean, I guess you look at the Grand Canyon. This would be
I was going to say, or there are all these, and I'm not speaking to the veracity of this, but there's all these pseudo archaeology claims about the actual age of the Sphinx,
right?
And there's an argument that goes, no, it's water erosion. Mm-hmm. That's in evidence. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, water's caused all kinds of problems. And my door now, it's been almost 2 years. It looks just as good now as it did when I stained it last. And so I'm like, oh, I could have done that years ago. So anyway, if you have issues with that, you mean your gutters, or maybe just a couple extra gutters, I don't know, whatever it is, you can't go wrong with Brothers Adjust Your Gutters, whether you're the east side or the west side of the state. You find them at brothersgutters.com. Also, the support page can link you directly to Kurt and Greg so they can get that work done for you. Or maybe just need them cleaned or fixed, whatever it might be. Even if it's in your business, they can do all that. No job is too big or too small. 10% off. You mentioned Final Four. And so, one of the interesting things about this whole dynamic with the portal that is this escalation of pricing. We see this with professional football, right? Like the next quarterback is always the highest paid quarterback until the next one gets signed,
right?
Pretty much, right?
Right.
And I feel like
you saw it with Jared Goff,
right? Jared Goff, right? It's a good example. And I feel like you're definitely seeing that with NIL, and with these agents saying, this is guy in Washington's making $2 million, who's an average guy,
I would say that I don't think that's quite fair. I mean, Osborne is a very good player, but he's not. This isn't a guy who's as accomplished as, say, Toshibwe was 2 years ago.
I guess that's what I mean.
God forbid, Hunter Dickinson.
Right. These are not generational players who are getting these massive contracts.
Right. Yes.
But we have no idea. There's no way to verify that any of these things are correct. You can verify lots of these contracts with the NFL because it's registered somewhere, or obviously if it's with a public university.
Those are facts.
Yeah.
They have to be. Yeah, they are disclosed.
But these are not. These are nebulous. Well, some person gives money, or there's like, there's cardio kicks in some money and stuff. I mean, there's so much that I think is not real, and there's a lot of that is purported by these agents in order to inflate the value of the next guy they've got, the other four players are representing, whatever. And so I don't mean to say that there aren't people making a lot of money, because I think that's the case. And probably you look at Zalaska, and I'm sure he's a guy who wants to play, but he's kind of like, well, if I think he was between VCU and MSU. He's probably like, well,
that's what it was. It was supposedly VCU, Rhode Island, and MSU. So 2 A-10 programs. And I saw it suggested that part of this, maybe a big part of it, was that the money at a Michigan State was better.
For sure. And so you think, well, if I got about it, I'm going to play probably the same amount of minutes either place. Maybe it'd be a little bit harder at Michigan State, but maybe walking away with, pay for my college or pay for the next 2, buy a house or something like that. Right. So it's a lot easier decision for these players. But anyway, I think, a lot of this NIL stuff is just phony baloney, in the sense that I just don't think the money that the numbers are thrown around are probably, I don't know how guaranteed they are. I mean, there's a lot of it that is, I think, not really totally clear, right? And so
you're making a good point. Supposedly the deal with the Great Ospar situation that you were referencing is those numbers came from his agent.
Yeah.
His agent chose to disclose those. Now, I'd say, well, what motivation does an agent have in disclosing them? Well, for starters,
I'm a great agent.
It becomes something that the agent can tout to future players, say, look what I got done for this guy. And you're absolutely right. How do we have any verification of this? I mean, I will say this. We just had a guest and that episode has run, right? The University of Washington.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think you got the gist of where basketball sits in the overall athletic firmament at the University of
Not
Washington.
number one, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And probably behind spring football for number 2.
Yeah.
So no offense.
No,
I
it's just
mean,
that that's
it's
its
still a
culture there
big
in
time school and but that's how it is. So is there reason to be skeptical of that number? Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you're foolish if you're not. And we have no way of verifying any of these things. I mean, they just don't. There's no clearinghouse that has these contracts. There's, I don't even know. These are many of these schools. Obviously, Washington would be one of public institutions, but given that the NIL deals are not direct with the schools, I don't think there's any way that freedom of information
Nope.
Could apply. You're just taking people's word for it. And at the same time, we have heard myriad complaints in both football and basketball during this fairly brief period that NIL has been in effect, of guys who supposedly didn't get everything, or even in some instances, most of what they were promised. So who the hell knows? I mean, I'm inherently skeptical of these kind of numbers that get bandied about in the media on these deals. I'm not skeptical of the things I've heard about Michigan State because they seem to make intuitive sense. And I've got a sense of where Michigan State sits in the landscape. Could Michigan State go out and decide that they want to outbid everybody for Cliff Omoruyi or Great Osborne? Yes. The resources are there. Tom Izzo, this is my understanding. I firmly believe it. There are avenues he could go in if he chose to and said, I need $2.5 million to get player X.
Right.
And that money would be there. But he doesn't want to play it that way. And one of the reasons he doesn't want to play it that way is what we were talking about earlier. He recognizes what that can do to the overall team dynamic. Because if you do that, if you pay $2.5 million to bring in player X, how do you turn around to Jaden Akins and say, well, you're going to keep playing for the deal you got last year?
Yeah.
Or Jeremy Fears or Xavier Booker. It's all of a sudden,
Well, then you got next year's players you got to take care of. But
right.
Now the floor is different than it was.
So you have to be cognizant of these things. And look, there are going to be programs that just don't give two about that. And they will roll the dice and deal with the repercussions as they come. But I think they're going to find, it's in a lot of these instances, where a team underachieves and people wonder why. I think in this era that we're talking about, don't overlook this stuff as being a contributor. And you're unlikely to hear it verified. And you may hear speculated about,
right.
But you won't ever hear a coach say, yeah, we really screwed up paying this guy, $1.8 million to come in because it pissed everybody else off. And now I've got a fractious locker room. Guys don't get along. Guys don't play together, and we're losing because of it. They're never going to put it that way. But rest assured, this is another dynamic along with all the other old ones we've always had that impact team harmony, and that will have an impact on success. Believe it.
Yeah, it feels very much like Kentucky was when they sort of had this new model of just having all one and dones, right? That they'd have a whole roster, and that was Calipari's sort of trick for getting instant championships, which ended up not really panning out, I guess, in the end. They were very competitive.
Got him one.
Yeah,
got him one.
And then it, you can't obviously emulate it because there are only so many one and dones that are around. And it turns out that most of them are not one and dones. Most people think they are, but they aren't.
Yeah. This
feels the same way. This is different than they have experience. They have a track record in college. However, still it is kind of assembling these like all-star teams that you sort of just throw them together and then, or AAU teams.
And it's much more widespread, massively more widespread. As you say, there were only a couple of teams, Duke or Kentucky, and then joined maybe a year or so later by Duke, who played that game.
Yeah.
They were the only ones. There were not enough major impact freshmen for much more than that to happen. You would obviously have one and dones at other schools, but you couldn't do it where they had 4 or 5 per year. There was always going to be limited. But this stuff with and again, it's not just NIL. NIL is part of it, but of course it's NIL in combination with the portal. That's the big thing. When you have instant eligibility and the ability to pay people, well, now you've got a true free agency market every year, and we see what it's doing. You look around the Big Ten. I mean, Brad Underwood's basically reconstructing a roster every year. That's how he's opted to play it. I'm a little surprised he wants to do it that way, but whether he wants to or not, that's what's happened.
Yeah.
He has not been able to keep guys,
Yeah, that seems like more the problem for him, but yeah.
Yeah, Indiana's going to have a vastly different team this year. They're optimistic because they've added some guys with supposed names, but, we'll see how that all plays out in the end. Minnesota lost a bunch of guys.
I was going to mention Minnesota.
Michigan's got a whole new team.
Yeah.
On and on we go. It's just the nature of things. Very few programs. Michigan State is a huge outlier right now in how they're operating. I would have said Purdue is as well, but Purdue lost a couple guys.
Yep.
Mason Gillis went to Duke, and Ethan Morton, I forget where, he transferred down, but he went somewhere else. So, even Purdue is losing some guys, but they're the closest. They're very much in the MSU mold, I think, as opposed to everybody else in the league. But we are on this. It is truly a year-to-year sport now. And that's just where we're at. And Tom Izzo is, for better or for worse, trying to go about it a different way.
Yeah.
And, we'll see. We'll see how it all pans out.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine how quickly it has changed, because we've gone from the occasional transfer here and there. Even 3 years ago, I think when I joined the show, it was that was the first time it sort of like we'd have almost entire roster turnovers like at Minnesota, but it was like the team at the bottom that has no other, they have no recruiting coming in, and now it's like everybody it's happening to. It's really
right.
bizarre.
Well, it's been a gradual thing. So we had, we always had transfers, but you had to sit out a year, which really served to depress that market. You would see it. You would see guys do it, but they really needed to want to leave. It was not something you did on a whim, and you weren't doing it for financial reasons. You were doing it because you didn't like the coach, or the coach you liked got fired, or, you just, basketball reasons, basically.
Yeah.
You would do it. Then we had the introduction it's about 13, 14 years ago now, of the grad transfer rule, where if you graduated, you could transfer and be eligible immediately. And that changed it. You had more frequency of transfers, but again, it was only a small segment of the basketball population that would be eligible for that, because exactly. You either had a red shirt or you had to graduate early, one or the other, but you had to have eligibility to play left while having graduated. And the school you were transferring to needed to have the graduate degree that you wanted. So all of those things were a factor, but that broadened the scope a bit of transfers. But then, we had the double whammy of litigation and COVID brought about the portal that we now know with instant eligibility. And that's just completely changed everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've just got, it's just essentially a period of whatever it is, a month, 6 weeks of Wild West free agency. And so we see many, many schools, a heavy percentage of schools are having, significant, I would describe a third or more of your roster turning over as significant beyond freshmen.
Right.
beyond guys who are running out of eligibility and then incoming players you recruited, I would describe a third or more as being substantial turnover. And we're seeing that over and over and over. And so, what it does to the product, I have to believe, and this is something that I know we've talked about before, and we probably will continue to talk about it here, but you really do have to start to wonder, at what point does it negatively impact the experience of the fan?
Mm-hmm.
Most of what we end up talking about with regard to this is focused on the student athletes themselves or the programs, the schools writ large, right? But the big component that never really gets brought into this is the fans. And I do think there is, just as there is for ideas like expanding the NCAA tournament, I think you have to be cognizant of the impact that these changes have on fan enjoyment if you are running collegiate athletics, which, for now means the NCAA and athletic departments and conference commissioners. We'll see if the NCAA continues to be in that mix or if it's somebody else. But one form or another, those people have to be, I would think, concerned about this, because if you think about it, you can make an argument that goes along these lines pretty easily. I'm watching a product that is inferior in terms of quality to professional sports. That's undeniable,
Sure,
right? We all know this is true. So why do I watch it? Well, I think pretty unquestionably, the reason people care about collegiate athletics is they feel a connection. In many instances, though not all, it's because they went to the school. But there is some kind of connection that is different in kind than professional sports offers. And I do think part of that is, hey, these guys are students in the same school I was. They're in the same classroom buildings. They live in dorms just like I did, blah, blah, blah. And were some of those things always a bit of a fiction? Yes, they were. But there's also enough truth to them to make that connection real. And if you no longer have that connection, if the perception is, well, these guys are just mercenaries wearing a school uniform for 9 months and then they go to the next biggest check and they don't really care, well, that you have to worry about what that does to your fan base, don't you?
You'd think, yeah. I totally agree.
This is why I'm of the opinion. I think you can very credibly and you could very credibly hold the position that you are a believer in the rights of student athletes to make money in exchange for their labor, for their part in the business of college athletics, and also believe that this current Wild West system that we have serves the interests of exactly no one in the long run. I think both of those positions can be held simultaneously with integrity. That's what I believe. And so the question then becomes, well, how do you compensate them and get out of this Wild West stuff? Well, you need to treat them as employees, and they need to have contracts. And the contracts can be used just as they are in professional sports to limit and or restrict movement in exchange for compensation. What happens in a very general sense is the player says, in exchange for you paying me, I agree to work under the following conditions, which can include, I'm going to stick around here for at least 2 years. Something like that. That's what's got to happen.
Yeah, and then you have to have some overriding organization like an NCAA or whatever.
Yes, that
sets standards. Like
structure.
you can't have contracts in half the teams and half of them don't, and that
that provides the structure.
Yep,
and also that can serve as there has to be a way to structure this so that you can. I think it is possible to do this without collective bargaining as part of it, but
Yeah,
I'm coming around to. There's a very good account. A law professor, I believe, at the University of New Hampshire, and Michael McMahon. He was involved in the Ed O'Bannon case, which involved exploitation of name, image, and likeness rights, and was one of the first shots fired in this current situation that we have, where the NCAA just continues to lose, like they're the Washington Generals of the legal world. But he seems to be. I follow his account, and he's a sharp guy, and he seems to be increasingly of the belief that if they want to once and for all shut down any antitrust concerns, which are significant in all of this, believe me, that the NCAA or any successor organization will really need to not just contract with student athletes, but to collectively bargain with them, which means they have a union and you are putting into place a contract that has application to all union members. And I think that's probably where this is going to need to go. I'm beginning to come around. I know Jay Billis had last summer when we talked to him had offered the thought that that might not even be necessary to collectively bargain, but I'm coming around to the school of thought that maybe it is. But one way or another, we're going to have contracts, and that's the way. I honestly don't think, unlike many of the pessimists out there, I think such an arrangement doesn't have to kill college athletics. In fact, I think it could make it stronger than ever, because you now no longer have the moral dilemma of these guys are going out there generating all of this money by virtue of their labor, which means playing the games, and they're not being compensated anything for doing that. That's a big, big deal. So if you solve that problem, but you also put into place something that looks much more like what we've traditionally had with collegiate athletics, which means guys aren't one and done everywhere, and we don't have this Wild West free agency, then I think you're going to have addressed a lot of these problems we're currently experiencing. That's my opinion, at least. I mean, obviously there's a lot of different approaches you could take, and reasonable minds can differ, but I think most people probably conclude that the status quo as we sit here in May of 2024 isn't working.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. And I think you're right in your assessment of college athletics, because I think, if you look at just your hometown, I mean, you obviously have high schools, you have a college in town, you might have a minor league professional team of some sort, and then you have your professional league. I can tell you that the minor league games, no one cares about what's going on in it. They will go to them and they'll have a nice
100%.
night, but they don't care what the outcome. High schools, I think, mean less to people a little bit just because of the mobility in our country. So I think the likelihood of you staying in your hometown is a lot lower than it used to be. But if you stayed in your hometown, you would care a lot more about your high school. I would guess.
Well, and I would offer this: the people who do go care about those results. Why? Because it's either their kids, their classmates, or just people in their community.
It's a community, for sure,
that are participating. And
a college is
that's
a community.
why there's a connection. Right, exactly. Yeah. It's just a larger community than a high school. But that's why people care about those sports much more than they do the outcomes. Why they care about them much more than, as you rightly point out, when you go see, a AA baseball game, you're going largely for entertainment. You're not going because you really care whether the Erie Seawolves win or lose.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I think if you look at colleges, the same reason people are interested in colleges is because of high schools, except there's a larger base that they are. And if you remove the connection of actually being students at that school, people will lose interest in it. I don't think there's any question.
You start to get to being the Erie Seawolves.
I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any doubt that's how. And I think it can happen very quickly. And I think that's the real danger. In if you remove the fact that the school is a secondary sort of thing. And yes, I think anybody who's had a kid who or has been an athlete, a D1 athlete or D2 athlete, it is a full-time job. There's no question. And so it is. I talk to people like, I thought it was a better idea not even to be get this free scholarship, because the cost, for practicing and all the sort of things I had to do, you're basically a full-time job plus, maybe 2 full-time jobs while you're still also trying to be a student. It's really hard.
I know a guy, now this is not quite on the scholarship level, but it gets close enough. So I know a guy who was a very good football player here in Southeast Michigan when he was in high school. Good enough to attract the interest of Yale. Now, the Ivies don't give out scholarships, but what they do, right, what they do for football, basketball players, other sports too, but those sports primarily, you've still got to be a good student, but you don't necessarily have to be what the regular student would be in terms of your academic profile in order to get admission. So this guy got in, of course, because he was going to play football, and he lasted fall practice and then decided he didn't want to do it anymore and he kind of knew that's what he was going to do anyway.
Yeah.
But he used it to get admission to Yale, and he's got he had his bachelor's from Yale, which was fantastic. But the main reason he didn't want to was, even at that level, the demands on you are immense when you're factoring in the amount, and especially at a school like that. But this would be true of a Stanford or a Berkeley, any of those schools, where you're playing as a major college athlete, and yet you're also expected to deal with the academic workload. And so it is significant. And you're asking these kids to do all of those things. And we also, of course, we all want to have integrity. We don't want to believe that these things are just, athletic factories and they're not really students, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people seem to have that opinion. They want them to actually go to class. And, certainly Michigan State's basketball program, that's absolutely been the case. So what are we doing? It's not easy. There should be. And again, the biggest thing to me is simply this, apart from all those considerations, is you look at the contracts for television rights that these conferences and their member institutions are able to generate, and then with a straight face tell me that the kids shouldn't get any piece of that. And when the argument is, well, they're getting a free education in exchange for it. Come on.
You got to wonder these kids who are going to 4 schools now in 4 years. I mean, there's no real education you're getting. And you and I know.
Well, that's a whole other point.
Right. The other kids who actually go pro they go pro in life. Yeah. They're not going to go pro in their sport, most likely, was like a fraction of a percent. So now, I mean, what are you doing for kids? And they're going to get a payday for a couple of years, but that's not, that's going to dry up real quick. You can only play basketball for so long or whatever. And that's
absolutely
these are, real sports that generate money.
Yeah. And these are all good reasons why the current status quo, the current state of affairs can't reasonably continue to exist.
Yeah.
It's that we've got to see changes.
Yeah. And I think we will have to, and it's going to happen a lot faster than I think people probably expected.
Yeah.
Usually things are slower and gradual, but this is like a dam broke. And also I think the fact that the COVID year added extra people in the mix all the time has made things even more chaotic.
Yep.
And so maybe next year will be a little bit less so, but I guess, and we'll probably explore these more as the summer goes on. We'll try and get some people smarter than us or different ideas anyway to get it to weigh in on this. But as you go out into life, make sure you take care of things like your car. And so we recommend the Christian Brother Automotive, which is out they have a number of branches in Grand Rapids. They have a special right now. If you mention hoops when you go in, you can get $40 off your oil change, which includes tire rotation and courtesy inspection. That comes to $59.99. Also, you want to make sure you check out Nudge Printing. It's always a good time to get apparel for Michigan State or these other schools. And I know they have Indiana on there, but also most of the other schools in Michigan, getting ready for your son or daughter, maybe heading to school and you want to get something from Alma or whatever it might be, or Michigan State. Obviously, you can head on to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. If they're going to Michigan, you're just out of luck. So you got to find some other place. But you get 20% off. You mentioned Final Four. Type that in as one word at checkout. And I guess we're gonna continue our trip up and down. I guess the West Coast with our new Pac-10 friends. And
and we've since the last time we've talked about this, we found out that Michigan State will be visiting UCLA and USC next year, but we'll be hosting Washington and Oregon.
Yeah, I think that was one of the questions we had, is sort of how the scheduling was working. And it looks like pretty clearly that everybody plays 3 teams twice, and the we'll call it Pac-4. They're just playing each other twice, which makes sense from a travel standpoint. And then if you are a Big Ten team, you either play the SoCal teams at home or away, and then the Washington, Oregon teams home or away as a package. My guess is it's going to be one trip out west. It's going to be like a Tuesday, Saturday game or something like that. That'd be my hunch.
Almost has to be, and I would expect that we're going to have, a system of traveling partners. So,
yes,
Michigan State will be, let's just say with Michigan, and Michigan State will be at UCLA while Michigan's at USC, and then they'll flip it on the second game.
Yeah.
I would guess that's how they do it.
Hard to imagine them sharing a plane, but I guess, they may go at the same time.
No, I mean very loosely traveling partners.
Right.
Yeah.
At least you don't have to ride the train like you did back in the 50s. So it'll be a lot better for them.
Right.
Doing these. I still can. It's going to be a big pain in the butt for those teams to come out east. Even if you try and pair those games together, it's going to be a real challenge for them. I imagine they do 2 at a time, but that's, I guess that's what you got to do. What you got to do for money. And so that's just the way it works. So make sure you check out, if you are interested again in doing the live in-person dinner. We are having it again at the end of July. If you want to become one of the supporting patrons of the show, you can head over to Patreon or Substack to become a part of that. And the details will be forthcoming to those who qualify. So we'll keep coming with stuff throughout the summer. And then I guess we'll have to start our 18-team Big Ten preview sometime in like mid-June, right? Is that so we get done before the season starts?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You better
I
start.
Guess we're not that far away.
It's going to be a challenge to try and get that together, because the rosters, I feel like they don't really solidify till July. We have all the last pieces in place.
I would say this: you have the deadline for withdrawal from the draft at the end of May, but honestly, that seems this year to be more of an anticlimax than any year I can think of. There just aren't a lot of guys who you're really even I can't think of any. I may be missing someone, but there doesn't seem to be anybody on the fence, where you're like, well, as it usually is most years, for the last decade plus. That's been a really important thing. Yeah. Like, okay, who's coming back, who's staying in the draft, and that could really change the fortunes of teams. This year really doesn't seem to be, I think we're more waiting for the portal to completely settle and see what rosters look like, based on portal movement and who might still get added to Big Ten rosters. But I will say this. I haven't come to any firm conclusions on this yet, but I'm honestly thinking it might be a complete fool's errand to try to even predict what the finish of this conference looks like. I mean, I have no idea how we're going to begin to handle that. We probably will do it anyway, just to put it in some type of order, but I'll put it this way. To try to make sense of what the league is likely to look like in the preseason, it strikes me as an insane proposition at this stage.
So what I'm hearing you say is you're pretty confident in your predictions 1 to 18. Am I hearing you properly?
Yeah, well, not just mine. I don't know that I would buy anybody.
No, I know, right? For sure.
Because you've added 4 more teams. So you start about that. You got a further watering down of the schedule.
Right.
We've got fewer home and homes.
The schedule matters more than in the past, for sure.
So that's a that's a factor. Now we're also combining that with this Wild West of, a good percentage of the conference having major roster turnover. So it's not just assessing what have they brought, what have they added and subtracted, but how all those pieces are likely to fit together.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just, very, very difficult. When I look at it, and I think, I see people touting Indiana, and I just think, yeah, Mike Woodson's still coaching there, right? Illinois is turning over the whole team, basically. On and on and on. And, Purdue lost so many guys. It's just very, very difficult to try to come to any conclusions about what we're going to see. But we'll give it a go, I guess.
Well, you got to do something. And I think
I got to talk about them in some fashion.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like last year
we can talk about them. I mean, we could talk about all of these teams in a meaningful way, but I just mean there's going to be so many questions about everybody that trying to discern, well, what separates the third place team from the ninth place team in an 18-team league?
Yeah, there's no way to know.
Where schedule's a factor, and yet you don't really know yet how that, like, we get into the season, you'll have a better idea of, okay, only playing this team once and getting them at home is a big deal.
Right.
But you're not necessarily going to know that now, until we've seen a chance for these teams to gel and know what they actually are. So it's absolute chaos, but we'll wade through it.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I feel like even Michigan last year, I don't think the roster was even set until, well, I know we recorded probably in like September, and I don't think it was even 100% set at that point. There was a kid from Argentina coming or something like that. He couldn't come.
Yeah, who ended up not coming in.
Anyway, there's going to be a lot of roster concerns. I don't even feel confident about what Michigan State's going to be like next year, even knowing that there's hardly any turnover.
I do. I think here's the thing with MSU, you've got nowhere for anybody to go. So I think you've got your 13.
Oh, I'm saying I'm just comfortable with the roster, but how they will be as a team next year.
Oh, 100%.
I think there's so many questions, right? And that's absolutely. That should be an easier one to figure out than others where you don't even have. I mean, well, you got three guys from the Horizon League who joined with a guy from A10, and I mean, it's so almost impossible to try and figure out what that's going to be like.
No, you're right. It's a very good point. That's I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah,
to sort all this out. Like we can talk about these teams. We make some guesses as to what we think is going to happen, but we've clearly, if we've learned one thing, I think it's that the volatility imposed on the sport by virtue of these changes is such that you are really playing guessing games. I mean, look at Illinois. Illinois is a really good example of this. So basically the same kind of roster turnover for 2 years running, right? 2 years ago really didn't work very well. Last year worked wonderfully. And I would have said in the preseason that I had more confidence in their team 2 years ago than I did last year because of the lack of an obvious point guard. But it just goes to show you can't know. I mean, and then, the other thing is people used to, and with good reason, used to put a lot of faith in coaches. So you'd say, well, I know what a Tom Izzo team is probably going to look like in March. And I know what a Matt Painter team is going to look like. You would, even if you had a lot of freshmen coming in, what have you, you could put faith in coaches to a large extent, guys with track records, I mean.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Because they had a standard, they had a system imposed, they had a program, for lack of a better word. And so that tended to repeat roughly year after year. With things the way they are now, I don't even know that you can really take away a lot from that. I mean, we've had guys, if you look at since the COVID era has entered the picture, we saw Mike Krzyzewski miss an NCAA tournament. We saw John Calipari miss an NCAA tournament and then basically perform so far beneath his own standard that he got pushed out of Kentucky, more or less. Bill Self, not that it was a disastrous year, but this was the worst team in Kansas that he's had maybe ever.
Yeah.
This past season. And that's a year where they were preseason number 1, I might add. So These are Hall of Fame level coaches we're talking about. If those guys are not finding predictable levels of performance, what can we say about guys who aren't at that level? I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens at UConn. Everybody's decided that Dan Hurley is a genius. And look, you got to give him credit. He's won back-to-back titles. That's an extremely difficult thing to do. And he did it with somewhat different rosters. But is he going to be able to do it a third time in a row? We'll see.
Yeah, exactly. Well, stay tuned. We'll have, like I said, we're going to keep talking about the Pac-12 teams. We're going to get some journalists and people who are have some good insight into where the game is going and what's happening this way. And then we'll again start the previews.
We need to find someone who's going to talk about. This was a story that broke today that I just found fascinating, and I do want to try with somebody in the media. We'll have on, preferably somebody with a media and basketball background if we get them.
Mm-hmm.
Doug Gottlieb was just hired today at Green Bay. What used to be Wisconsin Green Bay.
Okay.
Because they just lost their coach. And
he's hired as the coach?
He was hired as the coach, but here's the fun part. So I don't recall whether he ever did a stint as an assistant. I don't think he did. He comes from a coaching family. His father was a coach, et cetera. But yeah, as far as I know, he never coached. If he did, it wasn't for long.
Yeah.
He's been in the media forever, but here's the fun part. He's apparently going to keep his weekly Fox Sports Radio talk show gig while he's coaching. We got to find somebody to talk about that. Because that, to me, we are in this era where every day seems to bring a story that you could, if you had that headline 3 years ago, your jaw would have dropped on the floor. And now it's just every day. You hear these insane things, but that might be among the most insane things I've heard. It's right up there with suspending a player for academic reasons from road games only. It's in that territory of insanity. I don't know how you do it, but we'll find out, I guess. Green Bay's going to find out.
We'll absolutely see. All right. Well, we'll end it there. Again, Nudge Printing, Brothers Just You Gutters, Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, and Christian Brothers Automotive. Check them out. Head to our support page, and you find all that stuff at the support page at thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. Until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.